Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm the recording. I'm the recording. I'm here at facility, and what we have done is we have a tribal tiki mask that we got from a old wandering old woman, and we proceeded to put it on a small child after poking them with a one of those extendo fingers, and also we have forced them to sleep under a haunted Indian burial ground, and also play nothing but cursed Sonic Genesis cartridges. Surely nothing bad will ever happen, ever, with this series of events. The next day, things have gotten very bad.
Greetings, everyone. This is the Tomodachi Bros bringing to you an episode of the Tomodachi Bros podcast. Joining me today is my good buddy, Ditaku.
That entire thing was entirely off the cuff and also was belabored, but as you know, hipster horse would say, that's the point.
You know, she would. That being said, I have offered to take it upon myself to give a TED Talk about a topic that I hold near and dear to my tiny snecky heart. You see, I am a big horror buff. I am also a big horror snob. Because, you know, if it doesn't make me lie awake at night and question my own safety, then it's not doing its job. I guess for context, I should explain that as a small Snek, I was youngest amongst my siblings. My parents were a little overprotective of me, and of course, you know, when I was a little kid, I didn't really have an interest in horror as a genre. And I was more like action, comedy, you know, anime, and other things that guarantee I'll never get a date. Now, while most of that is still true, the wonderful, wonderful world of fan translation and legally obtaining older retro video games throughout high school and college introduced me to this little game. You might have heard of it. It's called Clock Tower. And I was really intrigued because, first off, it's a silly, silly, silly game. I was just really blown away at how they basically took an 80s slasher film and turned it into a 1990s SNES puzzle game that, yeah, no, it was basically a puzzle game with like a horror coat of paint thrown over it. In fact, I would argue that most horror games kind of are. But it opened the door to me because that was my gateway drug into learning more about the 70s and 80s slasher films. And I quickly found that my favorites were a lot of the dark comedies, and then a certain Pugum, a certain plucky Pugum, who may or may not be in the room with us as we speak, was like, "You ever seen Evil Dead?" And I was like, "I have not." And he's like, "We can fix that." So he did.
See, I was the impetus for you to see Evil Dead.
You were,
That's
yes.
actually, that's not exactly like niche, or I will say though, I honestly, out of all the horror films I've ever seen, and I've seen a fair few, even though honestly I'm not like that big of a horror buff, I find them boring, really. It's like, oh no,
it's honestly they're frustrating, most of them, because it's like, of course you're going to do the thing that's not actually intelligent. Of course you're going to be like, oh no, I got to go to the dead end. I got to go to dead end. That's the way that the bad guy will never come and get me there. It's like, he of course is going to come and get you. So honestly, that's kind of the thing with Evil Dead, is that not only is it actually like take a moment, or a few moments rather, to actually kind of, be funny, but it's kind of a back and forth where between the monsters and, Ash. That's just kind of just my thing with horror. Most times I'm like, I just don't find them funny, or don't find them funny. I don't find them interesting. And so, like, the ones I do really like the Thing or Evil Dead, it's like there's kind of a back and forth where, like, oh, they are learning more things about what's going on, so they're able to fight back. It's not just like the monster always has an advantage at all times, and it's just, which is kind of my problem with like the original Alien, is that, I mean, the monster has an advantage. They don't know where it is. It's incredibly tough, incredibly fast, and just like seems to be able to like sneak away at any given moment. And yet somehow they're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna fight back against this thing." You're like, "No, you're not."
You certainly are not. Yeah, you see, if the main character has no hope, there's no tension because there's no one does not exist without the other. It's two sides of the
Mm-hmm.
same coin, etc., etc. And so having that back and forth. In fact, I think dark comedies work best as horror films versus straight horror in many different ways. Because if the movie can get you to laugh intermittently, it breaks tension. But it does it in such a way that you're all the more off guard the next time tension enters the equation. Which honestly I think is brilliant. That's actually, I would say Evil Dead 2 in particular was like masterful at striking that balance.
Honestly, out of the three films, I would argue Evil Dead 2 is probably the best one. As much as Ash versus the Army of Darkness is quotable,
And it
I
is.
mean, that's where we get, this is my boomstick, or hail to the king, baby. Honestly, it gets really goofy at the end. So,
It does. It does, and that's fair.
so both of them are good,
Yes.
but I honestly prefer Evil Dead 2. So,
Makes sense. So suddenly I'm straight down the rabbit hole and I'm like, dude, I've got to see these. And of course, like during that time, like middle school, high school, college, I got really into the angry video game nerd, and one of his passions is horror films. And I'm just like, oh, that's weird. Like this movie he's talking about looks really weird or cool or interesting. That's how I first saw Plan 9 from Outer Space, was because James Rolfe recommended it. And it's a great film. It's not a good film, but it is a great one.
yeah, I've known a few that are like that. Like, I mean, it's not really a horror. It's not a horror film at all. But there's a Tom Hanks film from the early '90s, Joe versus the Volcano.
Right.
It's one of those films that you really, the only reason why I know about it was the fact that when I was very, very young, my parents recorded it on our VCR off TV. And so it's just one of those films that, we would watch occasionally. And so, but like thinking about it, I'm like, there's a reason why this is not considered one of Tom Hanks's like greatest films. It is really stupid, but I'm like, this is a film I like. I think it's great. I don't think it's good. I wouldn't be like out of my way go, oh yeah, you need to see Joe versus the Volcano, but you know,
Yeah, but like all of these things fed the obsession. And so I'm
mm,
like, you know what? I want to see like what the modern era take on these things
I'm
is.
so sorry. I am preemptively saying I am so sorry, Snick, because I know modern horror is awful.
It's a mixed bag.
Dare I say, it's kind of dog
Mainstream
shit.
mainstream AAA horror experiences, especially those out of Hollywood, have been so unabashedly terrible. Like, not even funny terrible. Like, I watched that stupid Winnie the Pooh slasher film. It wasn't even funny bad. It was boring bad. And that's the worst kind of bad. Because you know what's not like a quote unquote good horror film? Was Willy's Wonderland with Nicolas Cage.
You know, see, the thing that really kills me is the fact that, like, honestly, like the most low budget, most like not thinking about things. Basically, they took characters that by rights should never and would never be serial killers, while ignoring characters like, for instance, there's another childhood character that actually would be a good serial killer, and yet no one has ever done that. I'm just saying, why isn't there a Peter Pan horror film? Because the guy literally kidnaps people and takes them to this magical fairyland where like there's just monsters and things that kill you. And oh, by the way, he's almost invincible. And oh, by the way, he is very, very he loves trying to put people in situations that they'll get killed. Why don't you do that? I mean, it seems like perfect for like, oh, I'm gonna take you. You tried to escape from me. Middle-aged person, you can't escape from me. You got to come back to Never Neverland.
I think that would require a certain level of technical finesse to make work. Not that Blood and Honey exactly was big on technical finesse, to be clear. Like,
Or I mean, I suppose you could argue, hypothetically speaking, I honestly would roll my eyes if they did this, but like you could theoretically do an Alice in Wonderland that's true to the books, that is actually like there is a serial killer angle to it. I think that I would probably be like, okay, we're doing this again. But I mean, that's another one that you could do.
for like
I'd
the
have to think about.
17th time.
I'd have to think about it. It just
Like, okay, here's another one. Upcoming, future tense. They're doing Popeye as a slasher. And
why though?
because it entered public domain. That's literally the only reason. And I'm like, you know what? You know what you missed? You idiots are so narrow-minded and so simple that you missed an opportunity to combine two characters out of the public domain and make maybe the best movie ever made this side of Sharknado, when you could have had Popeye versus Cthulhu, and you didn't, by the way. You chose the stupid, lazy route.
You could have had Popeye and Tintin team up to fight Cthulhu.
That I would pay good money to see Popeye and Tintin versus Cthulhu. I'm just saying.
That would be pretty good, yeah.
That sounds great, honestly. Like, that's the thing. A lot of modern horror is low-hanging fruit. It's not interesting. It's not compelling. Cog and I sat down and several years back, mind you, we were like in college, and we watched the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween. It was so bad. Why does this even exist? This isn't good at all. like that has kind of been the problem. And so I'm like, there's got to be something better. There's got to be a superior counterpart. And lo and behold, I kind of touched upon it. Mind you, finding good anything is kind of akin to panning for gold. You're sifting out the vast majority of what it is you're actually working with, and you're looking for the little scraps in between that happen to actually be good. You don't get, great big huge chunks of goodness on the whole. Broadly speaking, there's someone in the comments right now trying to write out some dissertation on the exception to this rule. But I'm saying, broadly speaking, 90% of everything is crap. So I'm like, there's got to be some contemporary horror that's actually good. And this led me down some pretty interesting places, not the least of which was the advent of the creepypasta. Now, I'm dating myself a tiny little bit here in my pet ankylosaur here, where at the turn of the early aughts, we had this explosion of internet-focused phenomenon. To give you some ideas of just how different this Wild West of digital internetainment really was, YouTube existed, but not in its present form. There wasn't a like or dislike. You actually rated videos 1 or to 5 stars. There was no dislike. It was just the number of stars you wanted to give the video. There was a concerted effort to create the modern version of the campfire horror story. And that's where creepypastas entered the scene. Once again, 90% of everything is crap. For every good creepypasta, you had to usually sift through 8 or 9 really bad stinkers. And even then, some ones that started good had terrible endings. Looking at you, Ben Drowned. I guess I should qualify this before people start crucifying me verbally in the comment section. Okay, the Haunted Majora's Mask creepypasta haunted cartridge, whatever you want to call it, started off super good. The use of early era YouTube mechanics like response videos was brilliant in an ARG format. I don't think the term ARG had even been coined at the time, or if it was, it wasn't in wide vernacular just yet. But it was amazing because for those who weren't there, try to picture this. Back in early YouTube, if I could post a video and I could be like, okay, what are your thoughts? Ditaku could link a video to my video and it would show up on both as like a comment, video comment response to my video. And this facilitated the game because the game master, in this case, a writer named Jaducible, would post a video and then invite people to respond using this video response system. And it created this incredibly interactive game within a game within a game kind of scenario. It was completely unheard of. And there was literally no major marketing firm anywhere in the world who had ever seen anything like this happen. So to say that we as nerds were very much on the bleeding edge of things that would eventually become commonplace in the popular culture would be underselling it a bit. I don't think there was a massively recognized ARG until Cloverfield. And oh my god, Cloverfield sucked.
You know, I honestly, for the life of me, cannot tell if Cloverfield is supposed to be a horror film, or if it's supposed to be a kaiju film, if it's supposed to be both, if it's something else entirely. Because all I remember is the giant monster.
The first one was definitely trying to be a kaiju film. It was a kaiju film that focused on the most boring aspect of a kaiju film. The boring, squishy, stupid humans. In fact, this is actually something I meant to bring up earlier, and I kind of slipped my mind. Part of the reason why modern Hollywood sucks at horror is because they think that people who are watching are idiots. There's a bit in the first Cloverfield film where they're in this broad open part of Central Park. Okay, now remember, keep that in mind. Broad open area in Central Park. They can literally see every direction. There are no buildings obscuring their view. Nothing. Now, mind you, this is a found footage film. So the cameraman is a character who they named HUD because clever. So HUD is turned, looking at his two friends, and they're talking. And then, out of nowhere, HUD turns around 180 degrees, and the monster is just sitting there and eats him. And that's how the film ends. Did the monster just tiptoe through the tulips and sneak up on them? How stupid do you think we are? Like, oh my god, that was a bad ending.
I would argue that when you're like, in regards to horror, you know, Hollywood thinks that the viewer is stupid. I think in regards to like any movie, Hollywood thinks that the viewer is stupid. But the issue is, though, is the script writers aren't better. Especially if, you know, films in the last 10, 15 years are any indication.
Yeah.
there's a reason why they keep having to go back to the sequel well, because every single time they try and do something new, it's hey guys, so we have to I know what we're gonna do. We're gonna have some invincible people, and they're gonna be like a invincible band of assassins. Okay, is it gonna be interesting? No, no. It's just basically gonna be Expendables meets Guardians of the Galaxy with a few Highlander things. Wow, that sounds really bad. No, it's an original idea, though. I guess you don't want original ideas. I guess we have to go back to the sequel well again. It's like, no, you could try writing something good.
It would require a certain level of technical finesse, once again. So what I'm saying is the indie scene, in many regards, it has largely replaced AAA, especially in my estimation. Because then you also run into, curious little things like some creepypastas were fantastic. Like I said, Ben Drowned started off fantastic, and then 10 years later it got its third part, and it shouldn't have because it was bad and really dumb, and I hated it. And oh my god, it was bad.
I really like the Godzilla creepypasta.
No, that one was fantastic. We did a whole episode on that. And then there were some really good short ones. There was one called Mr. Widemouth. And that one has always stuck with me because Mr. Widemouth is this creepypasta that this boy's family moves to this new house. And Widemouth is described as being about the size of a Furby. He's very small, and while he's a little bit weird, he's not in any way threatening. He has no way to physically injure the storyteller. But what he is he's a manipulator. And he keeps lying to this kid, trying to get this kid to do things that are going to get him hurt or worse. And the entire time, he's just he all he can do is talk. That's his only ability. And then the whole twist at the end of the story is this particular road Mr. Widemouth kept trying to get this kid to go down was a graveyard of past victims. And it's like this really, really good stinger. And I'm like, this story is short, it's punchy, it focuses on the matter, and it creates a villain who you actually have reason to fear. And maybe in a parental fears sort of way, more in the sense of, a small, naive child. Because the whole thing is the storyteller was young and he was sick during the events of the story. So he was kind of high on his cold medicine. It's like he wasn't even 100% sure what he was seeing was real to begin with. And then it was telling him to juggle knives and jump out of windows and stuff like that. So it triggers that paternal fear where you're worried on someone else's behalf. I thought that one was really interesting. And some of them certainly got really interesting and compelling starts. And by that, I would single out boys like the Slendy Man. It started off as a something awful Photoshop contest. And the story behind it was just, there's this weird, creepy figure, and he shows up in these photos, and these photos are associated with missing children's cases. And that's all the information we were given. That's it. And we're just like, okay, that's good and creepy. That's pretty good stuff. Because it leaves enough to the imagination for you to fill in the blanks. Whatever this thing is, it's horrible, and whatever it's doing is horrible. So you're like, okay, I'm on board. That's cool. Well, the internet caught on, and as the internet often does, the internet tends to ruin things that catch on. So the Slender Man blew up. He wasn't just a tall dude, he was a big dude, and he was everywhere. Early YouTube horror, especially in the first generation of face cam react horror let's play channels, loved the original game Slender. Now, this was not Slender the 8 Pages. That was a sequel/remake of the original Slender game. The original Slender game was itself a pop culture phenomenon, and it was huge. You guys also got to remember, this was a while back. So, that being said, you're talking about an internet culture where memes had way more staying power. When a meme was born, it stuck around. It did not disappear 15 minutes later like they do today. the early aughts, All Your Base Are Belong to Us lasted for years. The Star Wars kid was around for years. Numa Numa
Mhm.
around for years. These were jokes that were part of the zeitgeist years after the fact. So
Mhm.
even in 10, 15 years ago, which by the way is not the early aughts for those keeping count, even back then, things typically had more cultural staying power. Things became relevant, and they weren't as relevant for as long, but they weren't the mayfly lifespan that memes enjoy today. Rage comics were a thing for like 10 years easily. So, just to put everything in context.
I mean, they were a thing for like a good solid 5 years, maybe. I don't remember seeing any Rage comics after like 2015-ish.
Yeah, probably about that time. Point is, Slendy Man had a following. People were intrigued. It was an interesting idea. The monster itself was easy enough to design and create for small indie horror projects. He's just a tall, pale dude in a suit. Okay, cool. The concept was simple. I mean, at this point in horror, things that only move when you're not looking at them are kind of a cliche because we've encountered it so often. But back then, it was fairly novel. We didn't see it that often. And in terms of gameplay mechanics, it was still relatively fresh. Mind you, this was like contemporaneous with SCP Containment Breach, the first one. And NPC, SCP-173 ran on almost opposite logic.
I actually played that back in the day. I actually thought that was really interesting. I never got very far in it though, just because the trying to maintain eye contact with this freaking statue while also trying to do your other tasks in order to navigate around the other SCP. Is Containment Breach actually still a thing?
Yes.
Because I'd love to see you play that.
It's still around. There are updated versions, including 173's new design. There are multiplayer mods, and there's like updated re-releases. So yes, it is still around. In fact, I believe one of the recent version has like a good handful of really interesting SCPs that have like actual mechanical impact on the game.
I was going to say, I know that it's kind of a meme, but I always thought, I really wanted to get to the point where I encountered the old man. But as I stated before, I just couldn't survive long enough to actually get to the point where I was going deep enough into the complex to be able to see him.
Yeah.
So.
Plus, I believe like the original release only ever had one ending, and then like later on when they updated it, there like came to be others. So I believe in the original, the only ending was like you get outside and then you get gunned down by the security forces. And that was like the only possible ending. And then like later on, there was a thing where if you did 100% of everything and locked a bunch of the SCPs back in containment, you could actually like survive the ending. Actually, yeah, that's another thing. Like that was this early indie horror boom was around the time the SCP was first gaining steam. I'm not saying they didn't exist before then, but I'm saying it really started getting like attention around that time frame.
I was about to say SCP basically it effectively was it started with the X board on the everyone's favorite underwater basket weaving forum.
Right.
And it's basically their baby. I honestly think it didn't get much better after about a year or so, but that's just my personal opinion.
Like the first couple hundred or so are like interesting, and it really went downhill. But we'll get to that. we're not there. We're not to that part of the story just yet. There were like a lot of guys in the scene following these kinds of games, and Slender was one of the big breakouts. It was everywhere. It was memed on. People like analyzing the game, breaking down the way the game works.
I mean, you look at well, I mean, okay, so this is kind of going to be a thing right now.
All right.
But it's related, I promise. You know, you and I, not 2 hours ago were playing Minecraft, and this was the very first time I'd ever actually played Minecraft.
Mhm.
But I was reminded of this, honestly, a couple, earlier because just I keep seeing ads for Minecraft, and it's, these siblings playing, and they're having to avoid the Enderman. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, do these Zoomers even like know what the Enderman is supposed to be a reference to? I mean, and I'm like, they probably don't.
They
I mean,
probably
because
don't
these
know.
are a bunch of, yeah, these are, like there's a few of them that look to be like 16, 17. It's like, so yeah, like when these kids were like 4 or 5 years old, it's like, oh yeah, there's this like spooky internet guy, is supposed to come out and kill you. But they probably don't understand that. I mean,
No.
are people even making? Are the kids making the TikToks about the Slender Man there, Professor?
I would have to check to answer that honestly. That being said, the Slender games eventually became more refined. The last major one was, I believe, the 8 pages. No, I'm sorry, Slender the Arrival was the last and the biggest one. And around that time, a sort of fan consensus had been reached on the approximate nature of the beast and how he did what he did. Now, mind you, this was a amalgamation of a lot of different people's imaginations, and it's really there's no sole author to take responsibility for it all. There was Marble Hornets, one of the first big ARGs. I didn't really like Marble Hornets, I'll be honest. The whole thing was supposed to be like, in story, it's supposed to be like this college student film, but like the entire ARG felt like a bad college student film. I'm sorry, I didn't like it. I was not impressed with any of the stuff they did, and the lore felt very
So what you're saying is that
meaningless.
what was supposed to be a pretentious college film felt like a pretentious college film then?
Yeah, in that regards, I suppose you could say they succeeded.
Oh my God, they exceeded! They succeeded!
So, like, that being said, there was Everyman Hybrid, which was actually really consistently great up until like the very end. And while the ending itself was good, there was a bit during the third act where everything kind of fell apart for some reason, and things dragged on entirely too long. So it felt like it diminished the ending quite a bit. There's Tribe 12, which is still ongoing despite all this time. But the guy apparently is like now a special effects artist, like for real. So when an episode does drop, they're like breathtakingly good. But then like you kind of take all these things and then some, because there was a lot more than that. Those were like the 3 biggest ones. And people had this general headcanon about how Slenderman worked. And then Hollywood, as it is wont to do, was like, oh, hey, this is hip and with it, 15 years after the fact. And they're like, we could get in on that. And they did it at the worst possible time, because there was a real-life murder from this mentally unstable and deeply unwell girl who killed her friend and told the defense that the Slender Man coerced her to do it. And they released the movie anyway, and it was a bad movie on top of it all. So literally no one liked that. Hollywood could not have screwed it up any harder than they did. Now, mind you, by the time the film came out, Slenderman was pretty passé. It was not really a creepypasta that was much talked about, except maybe in retrospectives, kind of like this one. By then, they were already too late, and then they put such a negative stigma around it. I don't think anyone's ever really going to talk about it again, outside of, again, retrospectives like this one. Slenderman was hardly unique, however. It's important to know there was lots of other creepypasta monsters that got a good deal of attention. Again, been drowned, really big. There was The Rake. That showed up in a whole bunch of stuff, even though I think the Rake is one of the dumbest creepypasta monsters ever made. And also, it's really badly named. Like, I get what you're going for, guy, whoever wrote this story, because the monster is supposed to have these long, clawed hands, and they look like the blades of a rake. A rake is an old-timey term for someone of ill moral repute.
Yeah, like that's basically it's like they are oh no guys, you gotta look out, the himbo might get you. And it's like, what do you mean? Well, he's like it's a man and he's got a bow and so he'll shoot arrows at you. That means something. That means something else. You do realize? Does it? I was not aware.
So
I mean, that's basically what it boils down to.
That's
You know
a
what that
good
kinda reminds me of?
comparison, actually.
You know what this kind of reminds me of, and this is going to date me.
Go ahead.
I mean, you're familiar with Newgrounds. That basically
course.
is like it's like modern Hollywood salad fingers. That's basically what that reminds me of.
Oh, God.
I didn't really ever like salad fingers to begin with, but I kind of get the entire, like, it's this like really unsettling looking guy who just does really, wholesome things.
Yeah, and he's like trying to be this nice guy, but it's in a creepy way because he doesn't know any better. Like, I get it.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of the sense I'm getting from it, just from your description.
Yeah, and like the whole thing, like the original Rake creepypasta is like 2 paragraphs long. It's super short, and the whole thing is it's this weird creepy monster, and it can sneak into your room, and it might sit there and stare at you. It got really inexplicably popular. Like, I'm surprised it got as big as it did. Some of the Slender ARGs even referenced it. That's a huge plot point in Everyman Hybrid. Now, that said, you also had your bad creepypastas. You had your Sonic EXEs. You had every Pokemon creepypasta ever written. There was a lot of bad stuff.
But don't you know, the game came alive and it was super spoopy and there was the realistic graphics.
What about realistic graphics? Make them scary. Like, why do creepypasta writers keep falling into that trap? Like, that's a diatribe for another day. Point is,
Realistic blood, Snek. Realistic blood was seeping out of my CRT, and I'm like, oh no, I won't be able to play the Super Smash Bros. Melee anymore. Your face when my creepypasta would have been the Super Smash Brothers, the cursed Super Smash Brothers Melee game where you had to beat the really obnoxious characters. Otherwise, the game will just constantly mock you.
that seems.
And so it's not the fact that it's going to kill you. It's the fact that you can't play this game because, Billy, why don't you play Smash Brothers with your friend? Like, Mom, do I have to? It's like, of course. Jimmy doesn't have Smash Brothers at home. I'm like, fine. All right, nerd. Who's going to get played on now? It's like, I don't like this game. It keeps calling me slurs. Like, yeah, that's what it does.
That's its specialty. So that's kind of the horror scene at the time. You had smaller, lesser indie horror outings. You had your AAA horror things, some of which were good, some of which were terrible. That was the scene. If you're talking about indie horror, Slenderman was huge, creepypasta adaptations were huge, SCPs were huge. All of it. You would see a lot of that. That was like the scene. And then a thing happened. A certain man showed up with a certain bear in tow. You might have heard of it. It was called Five Nights at Freddy's, and it blew everything out of the water. Everything that the horror, and especially the indie horror scene, thought they knew got turned on its head. Now, the thing is, first off, it took a very simple concept and executed it well. Mascot characters are kind of creepy. Like, there's something unsettling about the jank way that they move around, And then to have this macabre story, like these children went missing, and it's very heavily implied the corpses are still on the scene of the murder. It's all done in this really interesting, hands-off storytelling approach. And I think one of the greatest strengths of the first game was it allowed itself to have a sense of humor about the situation. When the phone guy called you, a lot of the times what he would tell you was either mechanical information about how you'd play the game, or he would say something really macabre and off the cuff. He'd say stuff like, "Oh, I didn't think you'd make it this long. Oh, not to imply I thought you would die or anything. Why would I think that?" It blew up, and a lot of people point towards the massive success that these facecam horror YouTubers have had from the Slender era moving into the mascot horror era. Is there truth to that? Yes. Factually, yes. You can look at the numbers and you'll know for a fact, yeah, absolutely, there was. But a lot of people got on board. A lot of people were buying the games. A lot of people were playing the games. And a lot of them were doing it for different reasons. Some people were playing for thrills, because they just liked the horror ambiance. Some people were looking for the story because, again, a very hands-off storytelling method, that was part of the allure. And other people were playing just to see what the fuss was about. I'm sure there's other reasons, but I think those would be the big three. And so Scott Cawthon started putting out games at a pace that wouldn't succinctly be described as breakneck. This man chugged out games. I did an entire FNAF talk a few months ago. You guys can go back and listen to it if you want to hear the deets on it. I'm not going to revisit the entire TED talk because I just don't have time for that. The point is, FNAF exploded, and people started getting ideas. Ideas like, mascot horror is in, let's ride the gravy train. And before you people frowning thoughtfully at your cameras going, horror is dead, and mascot horror killed it, pull the stick out. Just, dude, get over yourselves. Like, oh my god, there's so many of these videos. And it's partly the company I keep. Like, I see so many videos every single day I go on YouTube, and every single day there's always someone frowning thoughtfully at their camera, talking about mascot horror killed horror, or analog horror is dead because this one wasn't very good. Oh my god, guys. I get that provocative titles drive clicks, but get over yourselves.
I have a thought.
Do tell.
Maybe the true analog horror is just being an adult. Think about it.
Oof.
You're required to get up in the morning. You don't feel particularly good. You're required to take stimulants into your body in order to get by. You usually also have to take very unpleasant medications in order to go to a place where people just constantly yell at you all the time. In order to get pieces of paper, so that you can go to another place with people that yell at you, in order to get supplies, so you can continue living, so you can go back to the place that requires you to get more pieces of paper in order to do it all over again. Isn't that just it basically is just a exercise in just existential dread?
When you put it like that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be a Debbie Downer here. I was just trying to make a funny observation.
I mean, I think it's horrifying because it's true. The best horror is the horror that keeps you up at night. So the thing is, this
Jimmy's just going to be like, I can't go to my job. I'm going to get jump scared.
You of course, you had your gravy boat jumpers. You had guys who struck while the iron was hot. You have your bendies. You have your poppy playtimes. You have all the usual suspects. And then, you have the coattail riders. You have your bands. You have your, I don't know. You have your hangers on. You have your
what
derivatives.
About that one Furby game?
Oh, Tattletale. Tattletale is an exercise in restraint. And what I mean by that is Tattletale was a great game. There's nothing wrong with it. It was good. And there was one DLC expansion that expanded the lore a tiny bit, and then they stopped.
Honestly, when you were talking about doing this, that was the one game that because it came out of nowhere, and I'm like, this is very clearly trying to make money off of FNAF. And then it just kind of disappeared. And so I'm like, when you were like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about, indie horror, I'm like, oh, like that one Furby game.
See, I tip my hat to the devs of Tattletale. Because for starters, they created a horror environment that was simple but executed well. And then, when they were done, they stopped. They didn't try to push it. They didn't try to sequelize it. They didn't try to come up with more lore. Don't get me wrong, guys. I love FNAF. I wouldn't have done the huge TED Talk I did back in October if I didn't. But even I know that some of it has been half-baked. Even I know some of it's come from conflicting sources, and even the creators a lot of the time don't seem to know what they're doing. So there's something to be said for Tattletale coming, doing its thing, and then just very quietly departing the stage. And it was perfectly okay doing that. That kind of restraint, a lot of modern game devs could stand to show. Looking at you, Ban.
I honestly kind of curious to see what a Snek ARG or, horror game would be like. I know you and I have talked about it. I'm just, it'd be interesting to take advantage of. Or
see, I've thought about it, and the thing is, I don't know. I don't know if I'd go straight horror or if I'd do a horror comedy kind of thing. I don't know if I'd want to kind of like mess with the idea a bit and like, oh, you thought it was something scary, but it turns out the ghost is a lonely waifu and she wants to get married to you, and do something weird and off the wall like that. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I could do straight horror, I'll be honest. I'd probably have to have some kind of comedic levity to it. I don't think I could do it otherwise.
if it were me, I probably would do something akin to that one. I'm gonna date the Entity game that you did. Yeah, it's equal parts like horror, comedy, and trying to say something probably deep and maudlin about life, and also have cute girls in it.
I want to hug that werewolf.
And why you gotta call me out like that, man?
I'm here to help you keep your feet on the ground. The point is, the nature of the horror scene has superficially changed and fundamentally remains unchanged. The Slender Man was one big boom, surrounded by a series of smaller booms. FNAF and mascot horror as a whole was a big boom surrounded by several little booms. You guys got to remember, even during the Slender Man boom, there were other much equally influential horror experiences. You had things like Ao Oni, you had The Witch's House, you had all sorts of other horror experiences, many of which were huge successes in their own right. The point I'm trying to make, I guess, ultimately is that the nature of a medium isn't in any hurry to change. While the dressing around it may change, we've gone from tall, skinny dude with no face to, Fazbear Entertainment is not legally liable for anything that happens here, now, or anywhere. It's the same fundamental concept. It's still a monster. And at the end of the day, we're still scared of monsters and, in a way, want to be scared by them. The threat simulation theory is the best I've ever heard for why people are drawn to horror experiences in the first place. the thing that kind of put me on this warpath is what I mentioned earlier with these essayist YouTubers who are just frowning thoughtfully and clickbaiting in their titles about no, there was this one analog horror and I didn't like it, so now the genre is dead because I once read the Cliff Notes version of Nietzsche.
They can't even do Nietzsche correctly because Nietzsche's entire thing basically would disprove what they're saying about Nietzsche.
That
But
is
that
also
would
true.
require them to have level of mastery. Also, I guess I can't like science fiction and fantasy anymore because there was Star Wars isn't good anymore. Star Trek isn't good anymore.
Yep.
Doctor Who's not good anymore. And let me tell you, I'm not a big fan of the Denis Villeneuve Dune films either. So I guess I can't like Dune anymore either.
Yeah.
Darn.
Yeah, it's like, guys, the set dressing has changed. The heart and soul hasn't. Horror is still a fun genre, if that's your jam. And not everyone's going to be into horror, but the lesson learned here could be applied to any genre or subgenre. Like Utaku posited, sci-fi goes through its trends. Sci-fi goes through its phases. Sci-fi has its booms. Sci-fi has its imitators. But at its heart, it's still science fiction. That really hasn't changed any. And the same thing is true for horror. The thing that you're actually seeing, but you don't realize you're seeing it, is more people finally have entry into the genre, both as consumers and as producers. People finally have the tools necessary to make their own horror stories. My good buddy Vintage 8 is an excellent example of this. He didn't even have live actors in his analog horror until A New Home for Mr. Barlington. That's like the 8th or 9th series on that channel, guys.
I'm just saying I would love to have see his take on This Is My Milwaukee.
I'll have to talk to him about that. Like, what do you think? If anyone out there is listening who had anything to do with the production of This Is My Milwaukee, please hit me up. I have like so many questions, and then you guys just abandoned it and went on to a much worse ARG. I don't understand. The complaints that are often lobbied against mascot horror are oftentimes the same levied at analog horror. You have your big ones. You have your Mandela catalog. You have your local 58s. And those are all great, by the way. Don't get me wrong. And a lot of people are trying to enter the space in their own way. Some with better success than others, certainly. But here's the thing. Just because there's one or two bad series doesn't spell out any kind of doomsday sentence for the genre. I see the arguments. I've seen people like, oh, Gooby is using AI, maybe, question mark. And there's The Painter, analog horror, and it's really tacky and tasteless and badly written. And those are all fair complaints, but you guys got to remember, this is what I was talking about at the very start. When you're looking for something good in a genre in the first place, you're panning for gold. Okay? 90% of it's refuse. And that's okay, because not everything's going to appeal to everyone anyway. If you showed me 90% of the library on the Super Nintendo, I'd probably weed it out down to 10-15% of what remains.
You know, most people aren't like going to be looking at, the myriad, NFL games that came out on that, because that's not what people remember.
For people who are sick of mascot or analog horror, I can't sympathize with you, but I do understand it conceptually. I think it's neat. I think it's fun. And I think it's actually really cool and, for me, really encouraging that there is a genre of horror that is catered for kids. Now, you might be going, Snek, that's kind of messed up. Hear me out. Let me explain. People should be able to experience whatever genres they're interested in. If there was a Five Nights at Freddy's when I was a small Snek, I probably would have gotten into horror way sooner than I would. It would have been my gateway drug, and yeah, I wouldn't have seen hard, violence or rated R films before I should have. At least no more than I did in real life. I might have I might have taken advantage of the fact that I was very tall for my age, and I got to see South Park the movie without being carded. But that's besides the point.
I'm going to say there was actually FNAF for kids during our. I mean, that's what Goosebumps was, dude.
Fair, but back then Goosebumps was only a novel. It didn't have movies and games and stuff tied to it. There wasn't an actual Goosebumps film until well after that.
Yeah, there was a TV series. It wasn't particularly good. This was like, 90s, children's television, tokusatsu level special effects. We're not talking about like, this is not going to, wow anyone who's, familiar with special effects shows. But, I mean, it did exist, and it was, pretty prominent. I want to say it was on Nickelodeon, forcing me to actually look this up. I didn't think we were going to do this, so I don't have the notes on this, but let me see.
There was a Nickelodeon show when I was a kid called Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which was kind of like a softball horror, and I remember really liking that show. But there was no games. There was no video games in a horror genre that a kid that like me could have bitten into during that time. You guys got to understand, my first console was a Sega Master System, and my second was the Super Nintendo. So there was a trajectory here, especially given Nintendo's notorious censorship policies during that time. I think probably the darkest and grittiest game I reasonably could have gotten my hands on would probably have been Super Castlevania 4, which really wouldn't have been horrifying per se.
Oh no, you have to fight against the Wolfman. Ooh. Okay, so apparently it was on Nickelodeon. It had 4 seasons. It actually ran for a fairly decent amount of episodes.
All right, that's cool.
Yeah. Apparently there was actually another season that came out not too terribly long ago on Netflix in 2021.
I didn't know that.
I honestly didn't know that either. But I mean,
I'll definitely say that the novels put out for FNAF are definitely analogous to Goosebumps with a FNAF coat of paint on them. But I'm just thinking, in terms of games in particular, there was no equivalent. Not when we were kids.
Not really. Then again, I would argue that we actually had children's television was allowed to be a little bit edgier back then. The amount of just action shows that were available and actually allowed to thrive was significantly higher. And not a big fan of a lot of the way that the writing is handled in children's television. Rebecca Sugar really was probably a war crime against somebody. I don't know who.
Good taste.
Not a big fan of basically anything she touches. Least of all, your boy Steven.
Yeah, people who watch the podcast regularly might have heard us talk about that once or twice in the past. The point I'm getting to in a very roundabout Albuquerque-esque way was that the genres are always going to have their trends and their trend chasers. If you want to see the genre change, be that change. Show us what you can do. Even amidst the FNAF craze, there's still been huge hit horror games in the meantime. I mean, the first one that pops into my head is Alien Isolation. That game was hugely popular. Now, it wasn't like an original IP or anything, but it was a very interesting take on an established one, and proved that different types of horror are still very much in vogue. So, I don't listen to the doom callers, okay? Because for every 10 Ban games we get something outstanding like Indigo Park, and that's got to count for something. That's all I'm saying. Any final thoughts, Tutaku-san?
Horror needs to try better.
Yeah.
Also, Scott Cawthon needs to do, the Pilgrim's Progress too.
And Desolate Hope too.
Yeah, Desolate Hope too. That was the one. He needs to do that one.
Fair.
I think it's interesting. A lot of this stuff is stuff that I'm familiar with. I saw a lot of the Slender Man stuff. As stated, horror is not really my thing, so I was like, oh, okay, it's just another thing kind of up there with zombies. I never really got or saw the appeal of zombies. I honestly think they're kind of boring as, monsters go.
Yeah.
And honestly, I thought the most interesting thing in Night of the Living Dead was not the zombies. It was the tension causing amongst the survivors.
Which was the point, based on Romero's interviews.
It just kind of passed me by. But it's interesting, to see things from another perspective.
Certainly.
And, it is cool, that you're so, you are as passionate about that, and I get that. Entertainment in general just seems to be not as good, and I don't know if that's a case of just nostalgia talking, or if it's a case of like the actual mechanical craft is worse. And I suspect it could very well be that there has been kind of a backslide.
It's the panning for gold problem. You're always going to come across the refuse before you come across the nuggets. I think that's the takeaway. So here's my challenge to everyone listening right now. Go down to the comments and write for us, 1 paragraph minimum, the legend of the himbo, the man who will hunt you down with a bow and maybe some arrows, and let us know the story of himbo, because the world needs to know. The die is cast now, guys, and we're counting on you to pick up the slack. The winner of this contest, we will read in epic format in a future podcast episode.
Okay. I will be sure to do all the silly voices for that one. You can
Awesome.
Count on that.
Awesome. So thank you, Ditaku, for joining me on this most excellent episode of the Tomodachi Bros podcast.
My pleasure.
And to everyone who is still listening, you legends, be sure to do that like, comment, subscribe combo we love so very, very much. And we're going to see you in the next one.